Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is, good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data, but there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for DEI stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these inclusive actions and policies within your own organization to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Tom Geraghty, founder of PsychSafety.com. This week, our conversation is about mental health in the workplace, Dictionary.com's inclusive language, and more. Let's get started. Tom, will you please introduce yourself?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Bernadette. Yeah. So hi everyone. My name's Tom Geraghty. I'm the founder of PsychSafety.com, and well, I'm a professional psychological safety geek. My background actually is in ecological research, and then I had a career in technology, managing technology teams, engineering teams, software development teams, eventually becoming CIO and CTO, and through that journey became really passionate about and interested in psychological safety in high performing teams. And through that, now I'm doing what I'm doing. And our mission is to make the world of work a safer, high performing, more equitable and inclusive space.
Love it, Tom. And for folks who are listening or watching, can you please define psychological safety?
Yeah, it's a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. It's essentially a belief that the group that you're in is safe to take interpersonal risks in whatever those interpersonal risks are. Yeah.
And it happens at the team level, right? Not like the whole company.
Yeah, so it happens at the team level, but of course it can apply to any group. So sort of any where any group of people where n equals more than one. So you can imagine it certainly applies at the team level, but of course if you had a meeting or something where there are two teams in the meeting, then of course that's then you can define psychological safety as existing in that group that comprises of two teams together.
Sure, that makes sense. Great. Well, in this week's episode or newsletter, I wrote about building trust and a little bit about my own managerial journey towards creating a psychologically safe team. And I wrote about how I struggled for a while with giving clear, specific directions and examples of what success looked like. And in my mind, I was like, I don't like to micromanage folks. I want to sort of let people do their thing, hire people I trust. But the reality is that without this kind of clear guidance, folks on my team, they had self doubt, they overthought things, they missed deadlines. And it's because I was showing up as kind of a bit of a know it all, right? I wasn't really creating space for or showing my mistakes and my learning journey. And so other folks didn't feel like they could do the same with me. So, can we talk a little bit about how to establish trust and psychological safety on teams? What does that look like in reality?
Yeah, so that's a really good point because I excuse me. So I had a very similar journey, really, and a similar realization where sort of in trying to be as inclusive and progressive and as cool like this is like maybe 15 years ago, like in trying to be as cool a manager as possible and giving people all the autonomy, I was far too vague and ambiguous in the things that actually mattered, and I was really reticent to give targets or goals or things like that because that felt like micromanaging. That felt like a bad thing to do. But in fact, you're absolutely right. Groups where the boundaries and norms are understood and explicit are psychologically safer spaces. We trust each other more. We can trust that we're doing the right thing because we know that if we do thing X, it leads to our mission. It contributes to our mission, our objective. If we're ambiguous or unclear about those things, or unclear about, say, for example, the degree of decision making that team members are allowed to make, like what we're allowed to make decisions about and what we're not allowed to make decisions about. Those boundaries, if we're unclear about those things, it just leads to stress and anxiety and ambiguity about what we're allowed to do, which is quite freezing. It's quite calcifying, isn't it? And so all of those things, like all of that clarity, that predictability, psychological safety is so much about predictability in interpersonal contexts. So much of that predictability builds trust that doing this is the right thing, trust that if I do this, the response will be positive. That sort of level of trust.
So if, someone who's listening is a manager and they're struggling with folks underperforming, what are some things that they could do besides clear boundaries and direction? What are some things they can do to foster a more psychologically safe team?
So yeah, it's a good question, because I think so. Here is where we can also make a distinction between practices and behaviors. So, for example, a practice might be, let's create a team charter. Team charters are a practice, and that's a really powerful way to foster psychological safety, because it helps set all those boundaries and expectations and clear goals and guidelines and all of that stuff. On the other hand, we have behaviors, which are more about sort of the way we do things rather than the things. If practices are the things we do, behaviors are the way we do things. And so behaviors arguably are somewhat more tricky and elusive and hard to nail down, because in some contexts, so active listening is almost certainly always a good thing to do. You really put energy and practice into listening well, rather than just trying to say the right thing or anticipate what you're going to say next. Active listening. Another, but a tricky one, and one which I see quite often recommended to foster psychological safety, is eye contact. And eye contact for many people is a really positive way to build rapport and psychological safety and build a connection between people. But for many people, eye contact, for many people, particularly neurodiverse people, eye contact can be really difficult, really challenging, really intense, and quite disturbing, quite very uncomfortable. So this is where sort of the behaviors and things are really about getting to know people on our team and what works for them. There is no real one size fits all. There's a lot of work we can do around framing work and framing behaviors, but fundamentally, getting to know people better and what works for them is kind of the powerful thing to do there, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, because we're all individuals. So of course that makes a lot of sense. So if there's one resource that you would want to direct folks to learn a little bit more, obviously besides psychsafety.com, which I love your site, by the way, but and your newsletter, what else, where else would you direct folks to check
I think so good shout. So if folks are into reading, books, then Amy Edmondson's The Fearless Organization is still the have you got it up there?
I have it down there. Yep.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, so that's still, to me, the go-to first step in finding out more and learning a bit more about it. From there, it then becomes a little bit more context specific. So there might be things specific to various people's domains and industries. But as a first step, yeah, Amy's book, the one to go to.
Awesome. All right. Great advice. Well, let's get into this week's Good Vibes. The first story comes from Hollywood. Actress Selma Blair and renowned fashion designer Isaac Mizrahi are launching an accessible clothing collection with QVC called Isaac Mizrahi Live times Selma Blair. And this is an accessible clothing collection featuring things like easy open necklines, magnetic closures, stretch fabrics, flat seams, etc. Now, Selma Blair has MS, and so that's one of the reasons multiple sclerosis. So that's one of the reasons they collaborated on this collection. I love it.
I love this too. Yeah, I love this too. So my mum actually suffers from MS, and so I understand what it's like to have that those mobility issues and those sort of fine motor issues and things like that. And I think this is such a nice move. What I'm really hoping is that this could lead into and will lead into more accessible clothing for bigger, bigger brands and more more high profile brands and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the goal. I mean, I've written about lots of accessible Halloween costumes for kids over the years, especially kids with neurodiversity or folks with disabilities, other disabilities. And so I think that, this is just great seeing it, seeing high fashion have this accessibility layer to it.
Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic. Really nice step forward.
All right. The next story comes from Indeed.com, which reports that over the last 3 years, the share of job postings that include wage or salary information has doubled to 50%, which means that 50% of job postings include this information, which is a form of pay transparency. It benefits job seekers, benefits companies' recruiting efforts, especially for women and underrepresented folks who might not apply if they don't know, if they might not feel like they are equipped to negotiate salaries. So this really goes a long way.
Yeah, this really does go a long way. I find this really interesting. I also find this really interesting as a transatlantic difference, because the EU, I can't remember when the directive was announced or implemented, but there's an EU directive going to come into effect in 2026, I believe, that will make it mandatory to publish
Mm.
salaries and things on job adverts. And I think it's it's beyond due, really. It's about time. Um, I think it's fairly obvious that this sort of thing contributes to things like the gender pay gap and uh, disadvantages folks like you were saying from marginalized communities, but also just disadvantages folks from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who feel like they have less economic collateral to negotiate, or maybe they're not even aware they can negotiate.
Yeah.
So yeah, but making this transparent is a massive step forward. Hopefully, it will become standard practice.
Yeah, here in the US, it's on a state by state basis, which does account for that big increase. So big states like New York now have this law in place now, but here in the US, very very few things happen federally.
Yeah, yeah,
At least these types of things. So it's great that that's coming to the EU in the next few years.
yeah.
All right. The third story this week comes from the Supreme Court of Mauritius, which has decriminalized gay sex, overturning a colonial era law. In doing so, the court noted that the law had been inherited from British colonial history and did not reflect indigenous Mauritian values. So great news, and yet there are still about 63 countries remaining that still criminalize gay sex.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a sad state of affairs in itself, isn't it? And we've got it does feel sometimes like we're making a few steps forward and then one step back, and there are other countries that are criminalizing gay relationships and gay sex,
Mhm.
which is which is just horrific. But at least there are. Yeah, I feel like there are more steps forward than there are backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the long run there are, but I think it's also easy to forget that there will be steps backwards.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
have such a sense of urgency, and we have made so much progress, but it's easy to forget that sort of in the arc of history, there's always these regressions. There's
yeah,
always the counterbalance. So it takes a
yeah.
lot longer.
Yeah, and it's easy to also sort of compartmentalize some of this into sort of, oh, well, that's an African problem or something like that, because
Yeah.
most of the countries that criminalize gay relationships are in Africa,
Hmm.
but we've got issues in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Poland, and such like, and there are certainly issues or problems emerging, I guess, in the USA.
For trans folks, those problems are here,
Mm,
especially in southern states. Yeah, absolutely. And in the UK, there's a lot of anti-trans sentiment
yeah,
as well. So
yeah, sadly.
yes. All right. The fourth story this week comes from dictionary.com, which has expanded its vocabulary to include terms such as diverse owned, CODA, which is children of deaf adults, box braids, and 8 LGBTQ plus terms. They've also removed binary gender phrases and now employ gender neutral pronouns. So they may have said he or she before, and now they're saying they, or they're omitting pronouns. So the language is catching up, and I think this is a great step forward.
Yeah, I love this, and I particularly love the normalization of using the word they as a pronoun, because it
Yeah.
for one thing, it's just easier.
Yeah.
It's easier than saying he or she, and
Hmm.
it's more inclusive, and it makes absolute sense. I also love some of the other terms in here. I'll admit I didn't know what box braids were until this until I came across this word. But that's one of the powers of introducing these phrases into the dictionary, isn't it? That um, we're all in our bubbles, and we try and
Hmm.
increase the size of our bubbles, and we try and expose ourselves to new things, but there are stuff like this makes it easier to encounter new phrases, new cultures, to us at least.
Yeah, and it normalizes the conversation around these terms,
Yeah,
and it validates these lived experiences. So I think some of the LGBTQ terms might be asexual, aromantic, some of those LGBTQIA plus terms. So some of
yeah,
but for folks who are identifying that way, this is a sense of validation.
yes, yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it. I also I hadn't really heard the term coder before, apart from I'm aware of there's a film called Coda, which I
Hmm.
think might be sort of what raised its profile, I
Right.
guess.
Exactly. That's a great film, by the way. Okay, the fifth story this week is coming. Let's try this again. The fifth story this week comes from Levi Strauss, which is taking a significant step forward by offering 17 professional mental health sessions annually to all of its global staff. So, this is including frontline employees through Lyra Health. So, 20,000 folks, including frontline employees, are getting access to this mental health benefit. And I just think that the more we talk about mental health as a dimension of diversity, the more we're going to have more folks invested in this conversation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think yeah, just like you say, that the more we normalize conversations about mental health, the more we normalize seeking help or therapy for your mental health. In fact, the more we normalize mental health is health. It
Mhm.
just is. So the more we normalize that, the better. The only thing that concerns me about things like this, and this is I don't know if this is the case in this respect, but the only thing that concerns me is a potential to sort of individual responsibility eyes mental health in a way that companies might provide yoga classes and some free fruit and say, oh, we prioritize our employees wellness and mental health because we have a once a week yoga class that you're too busy to go to anyway.
Sure.
So I just hope that this doesn't act as a this doesn't come instead of addressing systemic causes of burnout and anxiety and stress in the workplace.
I agree. I think for a lot of these stories, Tom, they're all a yes and.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
great, but or yes, let's
yeah,
do
yeah,
more, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And some of these many of these stories, especially Mauritius, it's about time or
Yeah,
finally. And so ultimately, here on 5 Things in 15 Minutes, we celebrate all of the progress,
yeah,
even the little
yeah,
ones.
yeah, yeah. The
So,
little ones.
how can folks get in touch with you, Tom?
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, if anyone wants to get in touch, you can find me online at tom@psychsafety.com. You can drop me an email for a conversation or a chat or to find out more. You can head over to psychsafety.com and get and find loads of resources and tools and downloads and loads of articles. You can get involved in our community, our meetups, sign up to our newsletter. There'll be other things I've forgotten about, but there's loads of stuff there. So,
Stickers,
sorry.
stickers.
Stickers, more stickers. Yes, we released some new stickers today as well. So yes, good point, Bernadette.
Yes, I have the Everything is an Experiment sticker on my laptop. All right,
Fantastic.
folks. Thank you so much for joining me, Tom. And this week's call to action is a LinkedIn post that we'll put in the show notes from Bo Young Lee. And the title is Using DEI Tools to Support Your Employees in Navigating Current Events. Because We talk about good vibes here on the show, but it can be hard when there is war in the world, when there is violence. So I want to acknowledge that, whether it's violence directly among your loved ones, wishing you hope. So, all right. On that note, hope you have a great week. Thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much.